Hello and welcome to the second in our series called Latinas in Leadership. This is going to be an awesome web clinic brought to you by VoteRunLead in partnership with Latinas Represent. And Latinas Represent is actually a larger partnership between the Political Parity Project and NHLA, the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda, as well as many, many affiliates across the country. And we're really excited to have this larger partnership and to bring their research that the Latinas Represent committee and community put together earlier this year and really bring it to life. I'm going to tell you just a few quick things about VoteRunLead, and then I also want to introduce our partner, Marnie Allen, from the Political Parity Project. As you know, VoteRunLead is a national nonpartisan organization. We are interested in unleashing the power and the brilliance of American women on our democracy. And this is a particularly important group because Marnie will share a few facts, but Latinos are the most underrepresented group in political leadership. So we're excited to be doing something about it. And today, we've got two fantastic women with us to really share their stories. This is a little different than some of the other web clinics we've done. We're really going to be in conversation, so we want you using the chat box. I love the title of this webinar, I Was the One We Were Waiting For. We're going to hear a little bit of their stories about how they got tapped for political leadership, what they've been doing once in public office, and of course give you some tips and advice on how you can join them. So I'd like to introduce Marnie Allen, who is my partner in the Latinas in Leadership series, and she's going to share a little bit about the research and introduce one of our speakers today.
Your line is now unmuted.
Great. Thanks, Erin, and thanks, everyone, for being here with us this afternoon. I'm really thrilled to hear from both of our featured speakers today. As Erin noted, Latinas Represent is a research and action initiative by Political Parity and the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda that we undertook to try to understand what we could do to change the realities of the underrepresentation of Latinas in politics today. Across the board at all levels of government, from state, local, federal, Latinas are only 1% of all elected officials. That is far less than our share of the population, which means that our voices are not being heard. And that's a tremendous problem when we think about policy making and coming up with good policy solutions, making sure that the policies which are enacted reflect the desires and the needs of the constituents that they're meant to represent. And so we've been traveling around the country. We spent a year in 9 different states and 14 cities trying to understand some of the challenges. Why is it that while there have been 12,000 individuals elected to Congress since this country was founded 200 years ago, of those 12,000 individuals, 10 have been Latinas, and 9 of those women are currently serving. So the benefit of their perspective in Washington is relatively new. We know that that must change. And so we have gone from collecting information to coming up with strategies and solutions. And we have been sharing this work across the country since February. And it was our tremendous pleasure to have Florida State Senator Anitere Flores speak at our event in Miami. And she was such an inspiration with her story, how she came to politics, her willingness to take on something which is quite difficult, how she thinks about balancing. And I don't want to give away too much, but I'm really excited to introduce her. Anitere Flores was the first Hispanic woman elected to the Florida State House in over 2 decades, and the first Hispanic woman to serve in the state Senate over that time period. She is one of only 3 Latinas who currently serve in the state of Florida. That is not nearly enough. She will share with us some of what brought her into political office, as well as the difference and the impact that she's making today. So it's my pleasure at this point to turn the floor over to Florida State Senator Anitere Flores.
Don't forget to unmute your mic.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I appreciate that I've been invited by VoteRunLead, by the folks at Political Parity, National Hispanic Leadership Agenda. I'm very proud to be part of it. I had an incredible time at our visit last year. I hope that through that visit we had an opportunity to talk in a bipartisan way about the importance of having Latinas in leadership. And every time I hear the statistic that there are only 1% of Hispanic women elected in office, it makes me shocked. It shouldn't be that way. Why is it that way? And what will groups that are here today, what will we be doing to change it? That is what today is a part of. I'm happy to share my whole story. Hopefully it inspires some of the women who are watching us today to participate. So I look forward to answering all your questions. And thanks again for having me here today.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. And I want to take a moment to, Marnie and I were so excited about this combination of folks. Representative JoCasta Zamarippa from Wisconsin represents Milwaukee, and actually just a recent magazine about like the 10 or 20 best things about Milwaukee, she was actually listed as one of them. So that and a variety of landmarks and Representative Zamarippa, which is pretty cool. I first met her quite a few years ago when we were doing training in Wisconsin. She is a longtime community organizer, longtime activist. I think, if not the first, one of the very few Latinas in the Wisconsin State Assembly, first elected in 2010 and then reelected with an overwhelming amount of, I think something like 81% of the vote. So again, we want to welcome both of you. And I'll start with you, Joey, with Representative Zamarippa, excuse me. And then I would love for both of your faces to sort of pop on screen. We want to hear, like, how did you get started? What was that transition like from, you know, sort of working in a not-for-profit community, doing your advocacy, and then making that transition into public life, into being a political leader? And I'll ask the same question of you, Representative Flores. Great. Don't forget to unmute your mic. Hey, JoCasta, there's no sound, so it's very quiet. I'm gonna actually ask you to try it without your headphones and speak into your computer. See if that helps. Okay, Joey, it's not working. JoCasta, it's not working for the sound. So I'm gonna send you a message so you can call in as well as be seen. Senator Flores, if you wouldn't mind popping on screen and taking the first crack at the question.
Sure thing. And I know that technology is an issue that we have, and we're all sort of learning how to use it. So I'm grateful for this venue. So I'm going to give my story in a nutshell. As Hispanic women, you all know that we can talk a lot, so I can give you the super long version. I'm going to try and give you the not quite small version, but the shorter version. So I grew up in a household with a very strong mother. It was a single mother household. My parents got divorced when I was young. My mom always was around politics. She dragged me to political events since I was a very young girl. She took me with her to vote. She took me with her to the ballot box. And so I grew up always knowing the importance of elections, politics, democracy, and I knew that. And so I went off to law school. After law school, I had a couple of different jobs, but my last one prior to being elected was to be the in-house lobbyist, the advocate for one of our state universities, for Florida International University, which was where I went. And so I did that, and I was enjoying it, was doing well. We were coming into a year where there were a lot of asks for FIU, and our state senator, our state representative rather, at the time, he decided not to seek re-election. That was something that came as a shock to a lot of people. And so when I went to him as a lobbyist for the area, I said, Gaston, what are you thinking? How can you be leaving FIU at this very important time? Who is going to be on behalf of FIU from the legislature? And he turned to me and said, I think you should run. And so here's the shocking part, considering, as I told you, I grew up as someone who had always been around politics, mom who pushed me towards it, part of campaigns. I did what, unfortunately, many women and many Hispanic women across the country do, is that my first thought was a thought of doubt, of saying, how can I do this? I'm young. I'll say I'm 27. I live at home with my mom, because that's what Cuban girls do. You don't leave home until you're married. And how can I do that? And so luckily, I only had that thought for a short amount of time. He asked me to go home and consider it. Spend some time talking with my mom, with my family. And then we did another thing that I've done throughout my career, and that is to take out a piece of paper, take out a pad, and put a pros and cons list. And I figured out there were a lot of pros, mostly revolving around the fact that I could move forward into helping my community, helping my neighbors, my neighborhood. It was an opportunity to represent my area where I went to school, where I went to church. So lots of pros, and the only con was that maybe I would lose. And so I said, in the grand scheme of things, that is not the biggest con. And so that's the short version. We went out, knocked on a lot of doors, talked to a lot of people, and I ended up winning, lo and behold.
And what was your win margin? Were you surprised by the voter turnout?
Were you surprised by the amount of support you got?
So the question was, what was my win margin? This is kind of one of my favorite things of my time of being elected. I ran in a 6-way primary. I had several other, I had 5 other in my primary, one of whom was a former legislator, one of whom was a self-funder that put in several $100,000. The other 3 folks were folks who were, known in the community, worked hard. 6-way primary. I got 55% of the vote, and the person that came in second got 18. The rest of the people just figured it out after that. And then in my general election, again, I won 65 by 65%. So we worked very, very hard to get to those numbers, knocked on a lot of doors, talked to a lot of people, but certainly that hard work paid off. And like I said, it was the best part for me was the opportunity to represent my friends, my neighbors in the legislature. It was really a wonderful experience, and I continue to do that today.
how did you tell your friends and your family that you were doing it, that you were going to run?
About that is that, as I said, initially, I was the one that had a little bit of self-doubt. When I went to go tell my mom, there was no self-doubt. There was no thinking about it. They were the ones, and I'm the oldest of three. I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and they all knew that this was going to be a family affair, and no one hesitated. And so my boyfriend at the time, who was now my husband, we're married, we have 2 children, they didn't doubt it at all. They said, go for it, do it. Why are you doubting yourself? You've been preparing for this essentially your whole life. Now is the time to put your name on the ballot. And so my family were incredibly supportive. They still are. They're a very, very large part of the success that I've been able to have. And they were the ones that said, go out, do it.
I love it. I love that. That's great. And Joey, let's do a little test and see if we can hear you.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Perfect.
Yeah,
sorry
about the technical difficulties.
Hey, I love that 1989 rotary phone you got on your ear right there.
We're being fiscally conservative over here in Wisconsin.
I love it. JoCasta, same question, sort of making that transition from, almost private life. I mean, you were an activist, you were out in the community, but at the same time, now you're really public. And who said you were the one we were waiting for? How did that process actually happen for you?
Well, for me, and it was great to hear, I just got to hear the tail end of Senator Flores talk about the importance of her family in her campaign. And the truth is, the first people who told me to run were, actually, it was an Emily's List training that I went to. I always credit a fellow woman activist in the community here, Marcy Pelzer, coming up to me and telling me. I was just attending the training, and it's very similar to VoteRunLead. And I was attending the training just for information. She came up to me and said, you should run for office. You'd be a great elected official. So I always credit her with starting the ball rolling, just a fellow female colleague, friend who said that very directly to me, and it was the first time it had dawned on me that I could help inspire civic engagement and help increase the Latino vote if I, in fact, was the candidate that folks were supporting. But moving on to my family, it is important to have the buy-in and the support from each and every family member. So I'm not surprised to hear Senator Flores speak to how important her family was in terms of being the catalyst for her decision to run for office.
And you've been elected since 2010. And Senator Flores, I want you to hop on when Representative Zamarippa is finished. What has been the impact that you've made in the House that, is something you couldn't do as an outsider and something you're really proud of? And also, I'd like both of you to speak to, not just once you got in, but on the campaign trail, did you find things were different because you were a Latino running for office? Were people excited? How does the energy different, right? Because we say this about women running for office, but when you're a woman of color, particularly a very underrepresented group, did more voters come out? What was the energy like? And then what were you most proud of once you got there?
Well, I'll start. I certainly know that being here in the legislature, again, I was the first Latina woman elected to the Wisconsin State Legislature, and I know firsthand how important it is to have representation both of women leaders here in the legislature as well as Latino people that hail from the Latino community. I was able to address those difficult, often politicized issues around immigration. I feel that I was able to put a face with this community, and I think that automatically helps to combat things like anti-immigrant sentiment that can come across and come out and be deemed as partisan politics, but truly it's an issue that needs to be addressed across the board. And we were able to actually pen a bipartisan letter this past session asking Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship. That was a letter signed by both Republicans and Democrats, and I feel strongly it's because I was at the table and was able to make those inroads and talk to my friends across the aisle about the importance of coming together on this issue.
Love it. Love it. Representative Flores, I'd love to hear as well your impact in the legislature, and we have a question around how long you've been in the state Senate. And we'll give you a minute to come back on.
Sure thing. So my first election was in 2004. I spent 6 years in the state house, and then in 2010, I was elected to the state Senate. We have term limits here in Florida, so I am in my 10th year serving as a legislator. Has given me a lot of opportunity this year to reflect a lot on what I have been able to accomplish and what I hope to accomplish in the future. Because we have term limits, I have one more opportunity for a re-election in 2016. That would be for a 4-year term. And so that means that I have years left if I get re-elected. So that's why I said this year has been a very reflective opportunity to say, well, what have I been able to do, and what more can I do in the future? And you have to remind me what your original question was.
Yes, and being in the legislature, now for 10 years, you've got to have more than one. Give me 2 things you're really proud of that wouldn't have happened if you weren't at the table.
Well, I'll tell you my most proud, and there are a lot of things, a lot of opportunities, a lot of things that you work on. But I'll give you 2, and they both relate to an issue that I'm very passionate about, and that is access to higher education. Without that access, people just won't succeed. It's just a fact. It's the fact of life. It's the reason why so many of either our parents or grandparents or someone before us came to this country. They came for something better, and we realized that access to education is it. So while I was in the state house, I had the opportunity to run and pass a bill that is a public-private partnership with our state universities. Since then, it's been expanded to our community colleges, and this is a scholarship program that the state will match dollar for dollar, any dollar that is raised at the local level for scholarships, specifically for students who are the first in their family to graduate from college, to attend and graduate college. So I always say that the reason why minorities still struggle to go to college, specifically Hispanics, is because they are maybe 1 generation, maybe 2 generations into this country, and their parents maybe didn't go to college not because they didn't want to or because they weren't smart enough, but because their parents were really struggling with putting food on the table. And the statistics show us very clear that if your parents didn't go to college, it's a lot more unlikely that you will. And most of the biggest obstacle to that is financial. And so what we've done is we passed this program in 2006, started with our state universities, continues on to our community colleges, and just recently, just this week, there was a breakfast honoring folks down here in South Florida in our local state university that have benefited from this program. And every time I hear the stories, you just get goosebumps and you say, wow, I had an opportunity to make this happen. And I have students come up to me and say, but for this scholarship, but for this program, I wouldn't have been in college. And the most amazing impact that I think that has is that now that you've changed that person's life and that person goes to college, then what we see happens next is that their parents will go, their children will go, their brother and sister will go. So you don't just impact that first person, you impact their entire family. The second thing, and I'll be briefer on this one, is also an issue of access to higher education. In the state of Florida, for so many years, we had, there was a disproportionate cost for students who had been brought to this country illegally or without documentation. They paid out-of-state tuition when they went to college. And these are students that many of them came to our country at age 2, 3, had never been back to their country of origin. They had been educated, and I always say we had spent the money on educating these students in our public schools for so many years, and all of a sudden when they went to college, they were told, close the door, you can't pay in-state tuition, you have to pay out-of-state tuition, which is in many cases 4 or 5 times as much. So after many years of trying, finally, this last legislative session, we passed a bill that was passed with bipartisan support, sponsored actually by Republicans in both the House and the Senate, signed by a Republican governor, that said we're going to stop this inequality and we're going to give those students the opportunity to come to continue their Florida education and move forward. So that was another really great opportunity, and students already started this year paying in-state tuition, so we were very proud of that.
That's so great. Both, oh my gosh, I love it. If I was more emotional, I'd be crying. This is what we're talking about, right? I mean, the impact in real folks' lives, it's so amazing. We've got a question from Carmen of Cape Coral, Florida, around what type of community activities were you involved in before entering politics? She wants to know, how do you get noticed, right? How do you get visible? How did the parties get to actually know who you were and say, yeah, you're going to be our candidate of choice? And Joey, we'll let you start. Go ahead.
Sure, absolutely. First, I just want to, please, if I can give kudos to Senator Flores. I got goosebumps hearing about the victory around tuition equity for our dreamers. Thank you. That's a great victory for us, for students, dreamers in Florida. We had tuition equity for our dreamers here in Wisconsin for one legislative session. Unfortunately, our current governor did make the decision to repeal tuition equity when he got into office. So it's something I reintroduced this past session. Unfortunately, did not get it through, but continue to fight. As you said, it took you many years. I know it's going to be a fight here, but I believe in the end we'll get this victory for our young people so that they can be contributing members to their community. But moving on to Carmen's question around how I got started, I did have an auntie, Tia, who used to make me volunteer on the campaigns that she was working on, that she was volunteering on. And initially she would drag me to them when I was a very young person. But as a young adult, it became a force of habit for me to do that. And I always credit her with instilling that in me, that sense of civic engagement, so much so that you should find the candidate that responds to your issues and go out and volunteer for them. And so I started out volunteering, decided I wanted to work on these campaigns and get paid to do this work. And it was tough to, you do have to network and people have to know who you are. But finally, in 2006, got hired on my first paid gig for one of our Democratic campaigns. And from there decided I shouldn't be working for these candidates. I should be the candidate, and this is how I can address increasing our vote. And ultimately made the decision to move from campaign organizer to being the candidate that was leading the charge.
Great. Senator Flores?
Yeah, great. And again, it's a wonderful story, and so many of our stories are very similar. So for me, I said first I had a mom who would just drag me to events always. Some of you might have that. Some of you may not. It's okay. There's still plenty of opportunities. For me, I had opportunity to work in legislative circles. I worked for our governor at the time, for Governor Jeb Bush, and then I was able to do state advocacy. So I had a lot of opportunities to work with state legislators. But much more important to that is that I had always been very active in my local community. So my church base was a huge place where I was able to get volunteers. My volunteers came from two places, and they were people that I have known for my entire life. Maybe some of them I only knew for, 5 or 10 years, but they became family. So one place was my church. I went to grade school there, my brother, my sister, always very active in the church. And so when we were looking for volunteers, we went to our friends and neighbors, and I had lots of people that helped and walked door to door. I had one good friend of mine who stood out on election day almost a full 12 hours. She was 8 months pregnant. That was probably the precinct where I got most of the votes, because no one's going to say no to a pregnant lady. So that's where I got a lot of my support from. And the second place I got a lot of support from was from the university students. Now, of course, the university couldn't take a position one way or the other, especially with so many people running in the race. But I had built a relationship with university students, and I went and recruited and asked for volunteers, and I had dozens of 18, 19, 20-year-olds that gave up a summer to go knock door to door in the Florida heat for the full summer and go out and take our message. So my advice for women who are watching and they're saying, well, what can I do? How can I replicate that? It would really just be to piggyback a little bit on what Jo said, and that is right now, today, we're 12 days away from an election, and the minute that this election ends, we're going to be gearing up for the 2016 election. But there are so many elections in your state, in your county, in your local community that are going on right now. Find one election, one issue, one candidate that you want to help and you want to move forward and be involved in that person or in that issue's campaign. My strong recommendation is the more local the candidate, the better, because you will have a lot of interaction with that local candidate. The folks who have came to work for me since I was elected were folks that helped me in my campaign. And so find that issue, find that candidate who you want to work for, and go and volunteer in their campaign today. Because you work hard for them, and that will get you noticed when it becomes your turn. And you just have to be ready for the opportunity, because you never know where it's going to come from.
Great. I want to stick with you, Senator Flores, because we have you kind of answered a couple of the questions that are coming in on the chat, but one, I'd like you both to answer this, but we'll stay with you, State Senator, around what happens when, the kind of energy around the Latino community is conflicting with some of your party's politics. And we get this a lot, particularly around, communities of color that, we're coming to you. I'm sure you get folks who are outside your district who come to you, right? Who, how do you navigate that? Even when maybe your personal politics, what kind of choices do you go through? What's the process you go through there?
It is, it's part of the challenges. It's never easy. I had one of my most growing experiences as a legislator was at my first year in the Senate. I was asked to lead the discussion on what type of immigration reform laws, or if any, would be passed in the state of Florida. We could talk about that issue for weeks and months and years probably. But let me give you one of the takeaways as it relates specifically to this question. I was asked to navigate a very difficult issue, and I learned very early on that I was, depending on what side I was talking to, I was either doing too much or not enough. And so it was a very trying time, and I had lots of people coming to my office from across the state, immigrants that came outside my office, had prayer vigils outside my office, and asked me to be their voice. The same thing was happening from the other side and the extreme on the other side, and so we went through a long process. I came up with a piece of legislation that originated in my committee that I felt was a middle of the road and dealt with some of the issues, and I continued to usher that bill along in the process. And when it came towards the end and it came time to actually pass this bill on the floor of the Senate, leaders of the Senate came to me and said, there are some things that we need you to change, and you need to make the bill stronger from a, let's call it from the border control side, if you will. And there were a couple of things that I just wasn't comfortable with. And especially since I had spent a lot of time working on this issue, and like I said, come up with an issue that was middle of the road and had won levels of praise from both sides. And so when they came to me and said, there's some changes that need to be made, I wasn't comfortable with it, and so I gave up the bill, and the bill was given to another senator. Ironically enough, that senator then made the changes, moved the bill along, and still ended up voting against the bill because some of the changes that were made. But I share that story because that was, and like I said, that's just a snippet of this, 5-month-long ordeal. But it was an eye-opening experience in realizing I'm not just representing myself and the folks in my Senate district. I'm representing folks that have similar backgrounds to me from across the state of Florida and to a certain extent Hispanics across the entire country. And from a Republican point of view, I was happy that I was going to be the one to initially move forward with the bill because I felt that then I would have some control over what it would ultimately look like to make sure that it wasn't going to be something that was damaging. But then when the rubber hit the road and it came time to move the bill past the full Senate, it became something that I wasn't comfortable with. And so, I ended up, giving up control of the bill, voted against the bill, and then just quick moving forward, the bill ended up not even passing because of various different conflicts. But it was a very eye-opening experience for me.
That's the hard work of compromise, right? That's a fantastic story, and compromise and conviction. I really hear your conviction there, and thank you, and thank you for sticking with your gut because sometimes we make those are hard choices, and that's the reality of politics. And I'm glad you're there. We have a lot of questions, so which is awesome. JoCasta, I would love for you to talk about, considering you did do a lot to mobilize Latino voters. We're 12 days out from the election. What are some effective methods for getting folks energized for really the local positions? Senator Flores just talked a little bit about that. The school boards, the local races, how do we get our communities, particularly Latino voters, excited about the local stuff?
Yeah, and that's very important. I always tell when I'm able to get in front of my constituents or any Latino audience, I talk to them about the importance of voting in every election, that we are the fastest growing community in the great state of Wisconsin, but we have to make sure, in addition to being the fast growing community, that we're also growing our voter base, our electorate, and the importance of that. And one example is the last local spring election. We had a young Latino man step up and decide to run for alderman on our city's common council in Milwaukee. And he went up against a longtime incumbent who just wasn't present enough and addressing really the issues of the largest the largest Latino community in the city. So Alderman Jose Perez did step up, decide to run for office, and we really saw a great bump in voter turnout for a spring election. As you said, oftentimes some of the lowest turnout in general, and you can imagine it is abysmal in my district. Routinely, it's a great honor for me to represent the 8th Assembly District. I represent the largest Latino population in Wisconsin. It's a tremendous honor, a tremendous responsibility. Unfortunately, we continue to report the lowest voter turnout in the state, so it is what I hope will be my legacy, increasing the voter turnout in my district. And it's always a struggle, and every year, every election cycle, we just try to get out there in a grassroots effort, hit the doors, but layering it with a media strategy, I think, getting on Spanish language radio, getting on Telemundo, our only local Spanish television station, those investments by campaigns. And I hope we have some non-Latinos listening. If you want to court the Latino vote, whatever party you are, make sure that you make strategic decisions in investing resources in our community to turn out our vote.
Awesome. That's right. That's great. I know. I was very happy. Every time I call your office, everything's in bilingual stuff. It's fantastic.
Yes.
But that other new layering, you see the door knocking, you see the grassroots. How important is it for volunteers and folks who are not running to get out and to, how, especially with these smaller campaigns, how did you get your volunteers into the community? Because you can't be everywhere as the candidate.
volunteers are the backbone of any successful campaign, any successful election. And really, for me, at the state assembly level, calling up those folks that I know believe strongly in the issues that I push wholeheartedly, whether it's comprehensive immigration reform, whether it's tuition equity, and for me, whether it's issues around marriage equality for our LGBT community as well. I make sure that I call those folks that I've had the opportunity to work with on other campaigns when I was working as an organizer, to continue to stay in contact with those people and build those networks so that you can call them and get them on the doors with you. And it's not an easy task. It's not an easy thing to get on the doors and talk to folks about the importance of casting their vote on Election Day, but it's very fulfilling work. And again, it's a way to get your foot in the door if, in fact, you do have further aspirations of getting a paid position, being the candidate yourself, and climbing that ladder.
Being staff in the legislature.
Yep, that's right, exactly.
I'm going to combine two questions around, what is your best advice, right, for a Latina thinking about running for elected office, and what do you think are the greatest strengths and challenges for Latinas, sort of what they bring to leadership?
Well, I would say, so you want the biggest challenge and the best strengths?
Yes, and then a little piece of advice.
I would say you have to have tenacity. Don't give up. Continue to believe in yourself. I think even now in the legislature, it's tough. There's always that lingering self-doubt. And I think it was actually VoteRunLead who taught me how women are oftentimes we are the last person to think of ourselves as being the candidate. We oftentimes are looking to stand behind another great candidate and work hard for them. So I find even in the legislature now, as the elected official, I have to continue to remind myself that I can't remember what the tagline is for us, but I'm the reason that I'm here, and I have to continue to step up and be a voice for my community. And it's difficult. As Senator Flores said, there are challenges once you're in here to be an advocate for your party, but be an advocate for our Latino community at the same time. I have run up against those challenges, and you have to just continue to have the tenacity. You can feel your feelings, but you have to step into that caucus and say this bill is important for our growing Latino electorate, and you're going to have to see that, and we have to push this bill forward and push it through. Sometimes you got to compromise a little bit, but you never forget where you came from and the community that sent you there.
Awesome. Senator Flores, the same question, a little piece of advice, and what do you think, what would the world look like if more Latinas were in elected office? What would we see?
Well, first of all, would there be a lot more pretty people? That's the most important thing. I'm just kidding. But I will say, okay, so most important advice is this. If you have an inkling, if there is a 0.5% chance that you think that you want to run for office, get involved today. I cannot stress how important that is. It's the most important thing, because one of the things that was mentioned, that Joe mentioned, is that we still self-doubt, and the guys do not. The guys all think that they were born to do this. The fact is that we were born to do this. We were born to make our community, our state, our country a better place. You can't doubt yourself. If you have 0.5% of thinking that this is what you want to do, get involved today. And you can do that by, like I said, getting involved in the campaign, calling the party, interning if you're still a student, or I suppose you could if you're not a student. Get involved today. That is the most important thing that you can do, because our male counterparts are doing that. They're out there. They're everywhere. We need to do the same thing. So that brings me to what are the strengths and challenges. I think the strength that we bring is not only do we bring a different point of view, but it's a point of view that is a reflective of our upbringing of being different than what is the current status quo when you think of a politician. Whether that person is a Republican or Democrat, you have a vision of what a politician is, and that vision right now is not us. And I see that as an incredible strength. because increasingly, and depending on the community that you're in, there's more people who look like us and look like whatever that stereotypical politician is in your mind. And I think it's a strength that we bring a voice and that we bring our passion. Let's be honest. As Hispanic women, we are passionate people. You're passionate in a positive way, sometimes in a negative way, but we bring that passion. And I'll tell you, a couple of times in my career, I tried to tone that down because I tried to think a politician is or should be. It makes you a better elected official. So I think that passion is incredible strength. The challenges are the challenges of balancing life that we do, not just as women, but specifically as Hispanic women. We feel that we have to say yes to everybody, that we can never let anybody down, and that if we say no, we're letting them down. It's been a 10-year process for me, and I'm learning to do this every day. My staff, just this morning, was giving me a hard time saying I have to say no to more things. It's hard to do that, but you have to learn to figure out what are the things that you have to do, and then what are maybe the things that you'd like to do, and then what are some of the things that you really just don't have to do. Because there are things that you do not have to do, and either someone else can do them for you or they just don't get done, and that's fine. So we have to learn to figure out what it is that we say yes to, what it is that we say no to. And one of the questions that maybe has or hasn't been asked yet, but invariably gets asked, is the question of balancing home life, children being, we're a part-time legislature, so we have another job, so how do you do it all? The short answer is that it's a challenge. Don't think that it's not. But if you have a support system, and that support system can be your spouse, your parents, your church, your colleagues, your staff, if you have that support system, you will be able to balance it all. You will be able to, and I said this in a previous interview with VoteRunLead, and that's that we have to stop thinking that balance is that you're going to be 50-50 or 33-33-33. Balance means that sometimes you're going to be 100% legislator and 0% employee at your real job, or that you're going to be 90% mom and 10% legislator, or there are days that it's going to be the other way around. That's fine. We have to learn to accept that. We have to learn to do that because our male colleagues, that's the way that they think. And not that we have to think like them, because we still have to think like ourselves, but we have to stop thinking that balance means that you have to be all things to all people at all the time, because that will burn you out.
Love it. You hit on something.
We want to, and those are the things we can't do. But in our campaigns, and this is a question we had earlier on, you got to fundraise. So you got to get people to say yes to you. And we hear this mostly with our communities, particularly with communities of color or lower income women. I don't have the networks to raise money. That same kind of self-doubt around raising money. We have a couple of kind of brass tacks questions. What are some tips you have on fundraising and using those networks? And those networks are, women aren't giving as much as men. Those are some good old boy networks that we have to tap. So how do you get that money, and how do you tap some of those breakthroughs, some of those good old boy networks to be really considered, whether it's an appointment or an elected position?
Is that it does take money. It doesn't mean that the person with the most money is the person who wins. That's not what it means.
That's right.
But you do need some sort of money just to get the vote out, print your materials, be on radio, et cetera, et cetera. So when I first ran, I was told it was $50,000. I had to raise $50,000. Now, this is someone who, I said I grew up in a single-parent household, was just relatively speaking, freshly out of college. Where was I going to come up with this money? So my advisors at the time stressed me out that I had to raise money, because the other guy, he was going to raise that much money and blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, the only thing I can do is I just got to raise this money $1 at a time or $5 at a time. My first fundraiser was at my aunt's house. My aunt invited her friends from church, her friends, parents of her kids' school, and we had a small event. People gave checks for $5. People gave checks for $25. Some people gave a whopping $100. And I got out of that event. I raised $2,000. I was floored. I was shocked. I couldn't believe that people had given themselves out of that. And so I just had a couple of events that were like that. I had my younger sister and my younger brother. They had their friends write $5 checks. I went out and just asked friends for whatever they could give. $5, $20, $50, whatever it is. So that first report came out, and I was initially very disappointed because I had only raised $35,000, and they had said, you must raise $50,000. Well, guess what happened? My opponent, Mr. Former legislator, was going to raise all this money. That person only raised $32,000. So all of a sudden, I became someone, and he had a lot of $500 checks. I didn't have any. So after that first amount came in, people started to notice. And then when I knocked on those doors and asked folks, the money folks, for money, all of a sudden they had to take me seriously because I was actually able to go and raise some initial money. So that first part is the hardest. Your first couple of $1,000 will be the hardest money you will ever raise. After you raise a little bit, everybody starts paying attention and the bigger money comes in.
That's awesome. There's a question. We know that Representative Zamarippa did take a couple of campaign management courses. Did you attend, a campaign management course, or was that something that helped in your fundraising ability? And if so, what resource did you use?
Yes, I've actually participated in many kind of campaign management / political leadership programs, and Emily's List was one of the very first. It was kind of a weekend-long campaign training on encouraging women to run for public office. And in particular, this was for encouraging pro-choice women to run for elected office. That was probably the very first political leadership / campaign management class or program that I participated in. The White House Project was probably right after, not long after that, and that was actually where I met Erin. They had a big Go Run, very comprehensive, I think it was that 3-day-long event in Milwaukee. I remember it was in a snowstorm, and I had just launched my campaign for my first campaign, which I was unsuccessful. The first time I ran, I did lose. I ran for common council in the city of Milwaukee, but that loss taught me a lot. And the next time I ran, I was successful and did win and become the first Latina elected to the legislature in Wisconsin. So these leadership programs were very vital for me. Again, it was at one of these campaign management / political leadership programs that a woman came up to me and said, you could run for office. You should run for office. And it's important for us to tell our fellow women, you can do this. Absolutely.
Awesome. I hate to have to end it there, but let's do this again. This was amazing. Senator Flores, if you wouldn't mind popping on and giving us a wave. We want to end at 3. We really want to honor your time. You guys have races to run. You have offices to run. You have things to do in your community. I want to thank you both. I know people are clapping in front of their computers. Believe me, I am. And I want to give you a big thank you. I want to also share some tools with our folks, and I'm going to let Marnie close out in just a moment. But come to National Go Run. Senator Flores, I'd like you to be there. So we'll get that together with your staff. Representative Zamarippa will be there. Very exciting. We're doing sessions particularly for Latina leaders, led by Latina leaders. So you're going to get a great experience. That's November 21, 22, 23. And Selena, if you wouldn't mind shooting that link in the chat box for me. We also want you to invite women to run. The story of being tapped, the story of saying you can do it is so very powerful. And we actually have these connections, right? We have it in our social networks. Just scroll through your telephone, right? There's like 10 women in your contacts who are awesome. And VoteRunLead has these amazing e-cards. We've partnered with Latinas Represent to create a specific one for Latinas, so find that at voterunlead.org/invite and send someone an e-card, and they'll get connected to us, and we'll make sure they get this webinar. This webinar is live, but it's actually recorded, so it goes into our library as well. And the library has not only this one, but our first Latinas Represent from Monday, as well as other webinars on power mapping, fundraising, all sorts of good stuff we want you to use. So do become a member of Vote Run Lead, and you'll get access to all of this good stuff. And finally, we ask that you fill out a short evaluation. Don't close the meeting.
We just want you to make sure that you
tell us what you want to see more of. And then, of course, we've got this in a series. We've got 3 more coming. It's 2 days after Election Day. We're doing it on starting your campaign with a great trainer out of Minnesota called, her name is Jennifer Godinez. We've used her tons of times. She's a longtime DRL trainer. You will love her. Next week, we've got 2 webinars for you. We've got an election analysis happening. Such good stuff happening as part of Latinas and Leadership series, and we couldn't do it without Marnie and her team at Political Parity. So I'll let Marnie close us out.
Your line is now unmuted.
Great. Erin, thank you. And thank you both so much. What a fabulous, inspiring webinar. For me, this is what it's all about. I love hearing from our elected leaders share what it is, what is the difference that you make in office. And it's so critical. And we all know that the challenges are real, but it's possible to overcome them together. And so I just want to add to Erin's thanks. Thank you, and thank you all for listening and sharing fabulous questions, and we look forward to seeing you all online again soon. So thank you.